The participants today are Michele Gill, and Max Croft. We join their conversation in the faculty lounge.
Boys and girls are different in the way they learn. And from the 60s and the 70s, what this book suggests is really the balance has gone the other way. When you look at test scores for girls coming out of elementary school and junior high and into college, you see there's a bump that happens when they're about 7 or 8 years old, where suddenly the girls are learning faster than the boys, and they're starting to get the better grades. And at the back end of this, when you figure when they go into college, who's going into research? Who's going into those things that are going to propel us into the next 100 years as well too? And they're seeing a lot of effort that has been spent on young girls.
Right.
And this book suggests that it's to the detriment of young boys. So when you talked about belief systems, how do you feel about that?
Well,
Is that true?
that's another issue that's right for looking at teachers' expectations versus what do they expect from boys?
Yes.
What do they expect? Why do they expect boys to sit so still, so quietly in second grade? You know,
Right.
Maybe because they see the girls doing it, and generally teachers at the elementary level are generally female, and generally they want well-ordered classrooms. That's another belief system. Remember, I'm interested in this problem-solving aspect of education, and problem-solving in classrooms is noisy. And one of the problems teachers have is they want their classrooms to look orderly. It feels a little bit chaotic to have all that noise. It doesn't feel like the schools they went to. So one thing to think about challenging their beliefs about is that maybe learning doesn't have to look quiet. Maybe learning can be a little bit noisy. Maybe students can be getting up and touching things. One of the things I did for my 5th graders, probably one of the best things I did, is I structured my reading and writing program around these workshops, and my math program too, because I was a self-contained classroom for the most part. And so we would do some straightforward multiplication tables and some didactic lessons, but then we would have 2 weeks of like a geometry lab where they would just come in with their notebooks and go to a center. They would interact, play, write up their observations, and I did no direct instruction. They would go for those 2 weeks.
Fifth
and they
graders.
had to, 5th grade. Loved it. But then I don't think you can do the classroom like that all the time. Personally, I would step back after those 2 weeks. We'd talk about what we did. Again, you have to practice your math facts and do that, and then we'd go to the next subject, and then we'd do another 2-week intensive lab. And writing and reading workshop, was like that too. But I want to go back to what you said about gender. It's a really hot issue right now, especially because the Florida legislature is talking about investigating looking at single-sex classes. Would that be better? Because we do see that there's differences.
Yes, right.
But my colleague, Dr. Bob Hoffman, he's new at the College of Education. He's done a large-scale study on this, and they have not found very strong effects of differences in education. Maybe some motivational and affective outcomes, but right now we haven't seen strong effects in terms of improving grades. So I don't think it's just a simple answer in terms of just segregating the genders. I think it's learning all new teaching strategies and being able to use the teaching strategies for the success of all students.
Right. And I guess age would matter too. I don't know when he did his study what age they were. I guess elementary school students would be different than say junior high.
Sure.
Junior high, lots of things are happening to biologically to girls and boys, and keeping boys focused, for instance, may be totally different than how they treat girls in that. But also when you talk about belief system, another thing that I thought about too is some of the problems in our society, I think, or at least certainly this book, The Wonder of Boys that I'm talking about, suggests is that in the way that we handle our students, our young students, has an effect on what happens in our society. We're seeing there's a lot of single parent families. We're seeing a lot of boys who don't take responsibility necessarily. They're girls too, but certainly. And how do we change that? What are we doing that's encouraging that? What are we doing wrong? He talks about a circle of teachers in your life. The first part of the circle is your immediate family, the mom and the dad, the aunt, the uncle, the grandparents. And there's sort of a second circle which include teachers, mentors, coaches, things like that. And then there's sort of a third circle which is about our community and how we interact with our community. Sort of that seems to be falling down just a tad as well too. I know I'm talking a lot, but even if you go into mythology and things like that, Joseph Campbell stuff, when you talk, we don't have enough myths now, I think he suggests, that ground our young boys and girls, and that's why we might have people finding what they need in gangs now instead of in the family. How does that belief system change, and what you're doing have to do with that as well too?
Well, One of the things that Neil Postman talks about, I told you that I really like his work, is that right now we don't have any current myth or story that animates education. There used to be, there used to be things that, the myths and things that, or even just ends of education everybody used to buy into, this is what education does. But right now it's just to get a job. That's not very inspiring for our students.
That's right.
Especially when they see the work world maybe not being as open to them as maybe it was for their parents, because of the current diversified economy. So what are the stories that could animate our students? I know Montessori does it in a wonderful way. I know you sent your boys to Montessori school, and I just recently completed a book review about a good book by Lillard looking at Montessori, like looking at the psychological research to support Montessori. Montessori hasn't been given the academic support that other research theorists have, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But what she does is she teaches, when it comes to elementary school, she animates, I don't know if your boys stayed in long enough to do this, but she animates their discussion, which she calls the great stories. So like the story of creation, and she'll reenact like talk about the Big Bang, or talk about, animals and what it was like, and she'll use drama and theater. I know, again, I was talking to you earlier about your interest in theater and how that could, be a kind of pedagogy there, to get students engaged, to think about our lives, not in just this kind of mundane way, but to see these stories that animate us, like the discovery of number. It makes it sound like just such an adventure. And it is a story, and it is very fascinating how number and how did symbol systems develop, as opposed to just, or today we're going to study, chapter 1 of page 3.
Right.
And I do think we learn through narrative. I do think that's really important. So again, that's about belief systems. What is the best way to teach? What is an appropriate way to teach? Is narrative a viable means of teaching? And I think one way to do that is to show teachers that it can work. Maybe showing them other teachers using it. What does it look like for them? How do you use this kind of thing in your classroom?
Well, and as when we spoke earlier, we talked about this breadth of knowledge versus this depth of knowledge.
Right.
And, I come from the digital media side of things. And more now, it seems people are putting down books and turning on a DVD player to learn, or they're going onto the internet and see their time needs to be rich in media, it seems. There were people that will argue that that's probably not a good thing. We should go back to the disciplined way that we learned in the past. And there are other people who argue that, no, this is the reality of the way students learn now. Mm-hmm. This is how they learn. We can't ignore that, and we need to include that. So when you talk about the Montessori teacher that tells stories, that's great. That too is an oral tradition that's been with us for a long time.
Right.
But what about those teachers that try to use computer programs to teach, mm-hmm. or animated stories to teach? How does that change? I mean, it's certainly that's a change in belief system, I would guess, on what was effective.
Right, and it's narrative. So it's whether you're speaking or you're telling the students a story orally, or they're looking at a computer program, or you're just this wonderful history teacher that can integrate clips from different documentaries to present a point. I think the underlying theme that connects it all is narrative, just some kind of meaning. I don't think our schools are structured based on meaning. Yeah. What is the meaning of all this? How does it all fit together? I think we're hardwired to look at meaning. I mean, there's neuropsychological evidence that says our brains are always searching out for what's the meaning here. Is it beneficial for me? Is it not beneficial? Just these quick kind of implicit processing all the time. And I think students are doing that in schools. But the one place they don't find meaning is often schools. It's just kind of just work piled upon each other. And maybe the only meaning, like I said earlier, is just to get a job. That's not enough. That's not rich enough. We're born storytellers. We're born meaning makers. We're born philosophers. And if we don't tap into that, then I think we're going to lose a lot of interest. And digital media, I'm not going to argue whether print books are better than movies. I think both are really good. But what I'm arguing for is that narrative, what needs to animate our classrooms. And so however many ways you can bring that into the classroom, the better. And I think the students you're teaching have a great role to help the students that I'm teaching. The kind of collaboration there could be immensely beneficial.
Yes. There's a lot of work over digital media. There's a lot of instructors who are saying, our students play games. Right. They love games. Right. So how do we involve education as part of that? I know we talked about 2C earlier. I know he's involved in that. Mm-hmm. There's other members of our faculty at DM who are doing that. There's lots of grants and research being written, going into public schools, trying some of these things out, and create a game environment that will teach students about narrative structure and about character archetypes, for instance, and how they do that in a play game. I would like that. That's not a question, but if you'll hold on to that for a second. When we talked a minute ago about the difference between girls and boys learning and how they're hardwired absolutely differently, when we say or we know or we discover that boys move through space differently. They have to get their information differently. You have to tell them 4 times before it's going to actually stop. Yet if you stop them and put it in their hand, they get it. That combined with what I said a minute ago too, how do you think we're doing with that? And do you think that's actually valuable? You know, we talked earlier, I'm a puppeteer. So getting a chance, when you can do a puppet show in front of kids, they're locked in and involved in this thing because they don't see a lot of puppet shows. You know, it's not one of those, but they are there the whole time. There's something moving in there that they're getting, and it's a lot more than if we were just standing up in front of a classroom. Right. What do you think about those types of learning and how that changes the way we teach?
I think it's amazing, but I think we're not doing it. So one reason of my strong interest in Montessori is, let me just backpedal a minute. Right now there tends to be 2 different ways of approaching instruction in our country. Looking at a back to basics approach where the teacher's in the front of the classroom using maybe different cognitive methods to really try to teach, using all these very scripted programs, et cetera. And there's some success in that. You know, I taught at various tutoring programs where they use those kinds of methods for learning some basic skills that can be important. Then there's this other kind of approach, a more existentialist kind of rooted approach. It can even be as extreme as a free school where you don't even have to show up to school. There's a thing called Sudbury Valley School concept that I looked at as for my undergraduate thesis. And these schools, if students feel like showing up, they show up. And then the faculty don't teach any particular classes. The students can play on the swings all day. But then if they decide, I wonder how swings work, the teacher might at that point give them a book on physics and they look at that. And then when they want to drop that, they go to something else. And I think that's actually a little bit too extreme the other way, because what if they never, you know, they're always going to acquire it on anything, but learning is hard. Who's going to sustain them in inquiry? So something kind of more middle of the road. And when I found Montessori, I found this is amazing. She gives students freedom. Students are allowed to explore, but it's not just explore anything. The curriculum materials are designed from Montessori's extended scientific observation of children, of what interests them, what kinds of questions are relevant for their age level, what's important to them to do. And she sets up the classroom such that there's a 3-hour block of uninterrupted time for students to engage in the material. They can put it away and choose something else, but they can only choose lessons that the teachers demonstrated to them and modeled how to use. They can't do anything they want with it. They can't make the block superheroes and Power Rangers. They have to do, so there is some limits on their freedom, appropriate limits. Not so much that it's this like kind of factory model of education that students feel like prisoners where they have to do these strict worksheets. There's certainly appropriate choice. And I wonder why it's not more popular. I think this book by Lillard takes a step in trying to give her some legitimacy in the academic community that she hadn't had, so that maybe her theory is given the same kind of respect as Piaget's theory or some other theories.
Right.
So I do think it exists. I don't think it exists in the United States in that many places. I think there's especially with a push for standardization and high stakes testing, et cetera, it's kind of compatible with this more open-ended type Montessori type learning. It's from what I can tell, studies of Montessori show students learn either about the same or a little bit better than in traditional schools. So you're not going to see like giant learning gains, but what you are going to see is kind of motivational, affective improvements in learning. Students are self-directed learners. Students like learning, but I think those are critical. I think we turn students off to learning in the young ages, and so if their achievements about the same, but they're coming out with a love of learning, a sense of initiative, a sense I can do things, I have a question, I can figure it out, and they don't see school as some dreadful thing to endure, but as some wonderful place that scaffolds their understanding and learning.
I think if we can turn out students who are independent thinkers at the end of the process, I think we do ourselves well.
Yes.
And I'll mention something that, you have a young boy. I'm very interested in finding out how someone in education treats his boy at home as well too. But when our boys started getting old enough, we had to make a decision about religion in their life. And of course, my wife and I are different religions, as a matter of fact, and we come from a theater background, and we've come from, I think we mentioned earlier, where we've explored a lot of different types. You're reading the Bhagavad Gita, or we have friends who are Buddhists, and the crystal thing. We've been through all of that thing, but now we have a real live person in front of us. How do we serve him the best? And I think what our way of thinking is, you can't teach faith from a distance. You can't teach someone how to, in order to dive off the diving board, you have to stand on the diving board and jump in. So our feeling about it was, we need to make a decision. We need to make a commitment so that they understand what faith is, how it really is in their life. Let them understand what the religion's about and what other religion's about. And then when they get old enough, they can make the decision. But they're making it from a point where they understand what faith is, and so it's not like this something that's academic or in a book.
Right, right. It's like you're providing those early experiences steeped in a particular religious culture that will kind of form and shape them as they go. Whatever choices they make, they won't lose that. Where someone who's not introduced to any faith experience later on, if they want that, they haven't had the opportunity to taste it at an early level, and it's harder, I think.
And I think you could go the other way too, being steeped in one particular type of religion and and dismissing everything else. I think doesn't serve, well, in my opinion, doesn't serve our sons and daughters well either. But I do believe you do have to show them. You can't talk to them about it. And I know I'm talking about faith now, but I think that's true of a lot of things, not just faith when you're raising a boy. So how does this Doctor of Education raise your boy at home? And,
what a good
and are
question.
you practicing what you preach? And how has your belief system changed since you've now got someone at home to care for him?
You know, first of all, you never are your ideal. I mean, that's the one thing I learned as a parent, is that you you have all these ideals about education, about parenting, and being a parent is just, you never meet those ideals. You can live in a perpetual state of guilt if you don't come to some kind of acceptance of your limitations. In fact, it's made me incredibly humble. You have these ideals and you try to live them. But you need to have ideals. I know plenty of parents who just give in because they go, it's not even worth it.
Yes.
You know, so what I do is I strive for that, kind of like a lighthouse, kind of guides my path, but you don't know that you actually don't want to hit the lighthouse.
Right,
so you just kind of orient your life around it. But I'll give you an example. I'm a working mom. I went back to work after my son was about 4 weeks old. Actually, I got my first job here at UCF when he was 4 weeks old, got a nanny, but I really believed in the importance of breastfeeding because I know that that's really important. It's good for the bond.
Right.
I knew I was going to be working, and I believe in attachment parenting and forming those early attachment bonds, especially with my research, my background in developmental psychology. I know how important that attachment bond with the mother is, and I didn't want to not work, but I didn't want to lose the attachment. So I really struggled. Do I give up my job? Do I do this? And I just felt like I was meant to be in the academic community, and it wouldn't hurt my son if I had enough time with him. So what do I do? Well, luckily, being an academic, you have a flexible schedule. There's such thing as breast pumps.
That's right.
You know,
that's right.
and then I would just come home and nurse him. He slept in our bed. I mean, I nursed through the night, and people don't agree with that. It's kind of, I looked at a lot of cross-cultural research and saw that was not unusual in most cultures other than ours for parents to do that. So I used my skills as a researcher to learn about different parenting practices. I implemented the one I believed in, and turns out he had some developmental delays that had helped, that the nursing and the bonding really helped with.
Yeah,
he had a lot of nutritional issues, a ton of allergies. He couldn't drink any cow's milk, couldn't drink soy milk. So he's a very healthy and happy and well-bonded boy. And I believe that early sacrifice that I did helped. But I do think parenting's about sacrificing your needs. Not all of them. It didn't mean I had to quit my job, be the stay-at-home mother, but I mean about making appropriate sacrifices, maybe not getting to have very much time for myself. I certainly didn't work out very much my first 2 years. It was either working or I was with him. But you know, it all works out in the end. It's just a couple years out of the huge lifetime.
That's right.
And now he's just a sweetheart.
It's a time well spent.
Yeah.
But what are you going to do? What are you going to do when he goes to school? And you, being someone who cares so much, passionately about education, and actually are working to improve education, what are you going to do when they start teaching to the FCAT?
Yeah, I'm going to create my own school. I'm not just joking. It's a huge issue. I don't know if I would put him. I'm struggling a lot with public schools. There's some very, very good schools in Orange County where we live. I mean, A schools, wonderful schools. I know the teachers there. Some of them were my students. They're just wonderful. But they have no choice over it. They have to teach the FCAT. It's not their fault. You know what I mean? Even if they don't want to. It's a state law. And I think, although the FCAT is wonderful for diagnostic uses, it's not being used that way. It's being used to punish or reward schools. It's being used. Students are getting sick, nauseous in third grade about taking the FCAT. I don't believe in that at all. So I'm not sure I would put my son in that kind of atmosphere, and I'm currently looking at alternatives.
Well, that's a belief system right there that needs that some people would suggest needs changing. Is that look what we've done to our schools by doing this, and certainly from a very good reason. I think the FCATs are there for a good reason. I think Florida's trying to work on its school system as well too. But in the end, you get teachers, parents, and students all talking about why is this FCAT important when other ways of teaching or other subjects may be as or more important.
Right. It's weird because a really good idea that's conceived often gets implemented in such a way that just turns out to be just not ideal. And like I said, it's a good diagnostic school. We are losing students through the cracks. There are students being promoted who can't read. I mean, it's horrible. So to identify those early and provide them with all kinds of resources and extra help and tutoring and summer school programs to kind of, level the playing field, raise them up, wonderful, wonderful. But just use it in a punitive way without providing support services for students, I think is wrong. And some students do better, and some schools do a better job with that than, others. So I do think that's again, remember there's different levels of influence. That's kind of an area that I'm not involved in, but the political influence on education,
right.
Policy. Those people working on that area are doing, I think, good work in trying to show the dangers and damages of high stakes testing. Not testing, but high stakes testing when so much is at stake for a 3rd or 4th grader to pass a particular test.
We're in digital media and you're in education. It seems like that's an area that has lots of opportunity for us to work together.
Right.
I mean, there's lots of things that, digital media is an underpinning for a lot of different things, whether it's entertainment, which we focus on, at least our little area of digital media, but also medical, law, government, military. More and more we're seeing, especially with new technology coming, there's lots of new niches for digital media to fill up.
Right.
Whether it's handheld devices, whether it's the internet, whether it's a car that's working or something. So how can digital media help what you're doing over in education?
I have a colleague, Dr. Lisa Deeker, I don't know if you know her, but she is working to try to get the software where teachers, remember I told you about trying to get them to, how would they change their beliefs about a particular subject? I get them to read these texts. Well, she's trying to form a kind of virtual classroom where they could go in and virtually interact with virtual students. It's a blank room, but they're wearing whatever the goggles and I don't know, but they are, and other people are watching them and are able to give her guidance and feedback, kind of scaffold her instruction, and she's not doing it to real students. So you're not like worried about hurting them. She can try innovative techniques. We can look at her patterns. Is she only calling on the quiet students, only calling on the girls? Is she, providing appropriate? I think that's one kind of application of digital media. For me, what I'd love to see is entertainment type modules, entertainment type packages that teachers could play and get engaged in that would question their beliefs about teaching, maybe get them to, watch this teacher, how she teaches this lesson, watch this teacher, watch this teacher. Okay, what would you do in this circumstance? And actually play some kind of game that allows them to try, and these are what's going to happen, almost be in a virtual world where you're trying these things out, like SimCity is. Sure. Build your own classroom, sim classroom.
Right,
and see what happens and see who drops out and who does this because of choices you made. That's one thing I see on the teacher education level. For the student level, I think there's some really good software out there. I think there's also some really bad software out there that's just trying to teach them, just straightforward. Again, it's just like taking traditional teaching and putting it on the computer, just straightforward. Do your math, do your worksheet, but just do it on the computer. There's so much potential,
so much more to do there,
to do it. My one program I tried, and I don't remember the name of it when I was a 5th grade teacher, it was a navigation type program, and it was in the context of a narrative of sailing a pirate ship. I had my students in groups. One was the navigator, one was in charge of food rations, one was in charge of weather, I think one was the captain, and they had to all meet and make decisions, and they were only given access to the computer program at different points, like they each had their certain tasks. So if one didn't show up or one wasn't doing his part, the crew died because they didn't have enough rations. They loved this program because if they all worked together, their ship would sail across this
sounds like a good message,
Now that's an innovative use of software. That's an innovative use of digital media to, they were taught navigation skills, they taught math skills, they were taught a lot of things. It wasn't just a worksheet on the computer.
And certainly team building as well too. There's a really nice book called Hamlet on the Holodeck that I've read. And again, we were talking about the difference between girls and boys and how they learn. And what this does, it's a really cool book in that it looks at the game industry, how we approach games. And we talked before about how I talk to my college students about how they feel about making shoot 'em up games and you win by killing somebody or throwing a grenade. What we talk about in our classroom is what's the difference between a game that's made for boys and the game for girls, because they certainly interact with their worlds differently. And the title comes from the fact that on one of the Star Treks, they had a female commander, and when she went to the holodeck, her virtual world was this Victorian place with a fireplace, and it was a love story, and it was all about, and what this book was making a very good point about was as soon as we get more female game owners and people who create our content, we might see a whole different type of gaming world. And so instead of about going and seeing how many terrorists we can shoot with the gun in order to get it as light, it may be an experience where you can go in and make a Victorian or a Roman situation or something like that. how do you feel about that, on how we use technology to teach girls and boys in the ways that are appropriate to them to learn? At certain ages, it's different as well, too.
Right now, most of that software is for boys.
It is, I think.
So people say, well, girls aren't using it. That's because you're not creating them.
That's right.
Create it and they will come. So why is that? Again, I think it's because people go where they think the money is, and boys are just avid video game users. You'd have to create it with a different paradigm, a different belief shift about what girls, you wouldn't want to be a game that they'd have to be at it for long hours a day. I don't think girls like manipulating things. And I want to backstep again. We're talking as if these gender differences are totally biological and engraved in stone. Research is not decided about that. Some of these say that there are some differences that are definitely hardwired, and there's a whole lot that's engendered by the environment. So I don't want to make a causal claim that it's environment or biologically driven. I think it's a little bit of both. But regardless, girls in our society today tend to not want to spend as much time at the video console. So it would have to be something that was engaging for them, something that they could come to and leave, not something that would take 10 hours,
Right.
And probably not with a whole lot of violence. But still intriguing, puzzle-oriented, problem-solving, those would be really good didactic tools,
It's going to be really curious, especially over the next 5 years. As I know, our program is most likely like a lot of other programs. We are graduating more and more women into the industry.
I was going to ask you, do you have women?
A friend of mine, Mary Kay Hazley, who used to run the Disney studios in town, was telling me when they hired people that they had a really hard time getting women to interview for the jobs. There was just not. It's not that they didn't want to hire them. It's just that it was maybe an occupation at that time that they didn't feel like was theirs or didn't have the training for. We're seeing more and more of that now, more and more. I think in our program, it's about half and half of girls and boys, or young professionals.
So maybe women will change it just by virtue of them being there, the creators of the program.
Well, I think the games too is not just young boys, but I think it's that group of men between 19 and 35 who like to go home and play on the end.
Yeah, that's
we
true.
don't find that so much with, I don't believe, although I'm not positive about this, of women of the same age. I don't think they spend that much time on the computer. I think that's going to shift as well too, as more content comes their way, something that's more accessible, something that has more meaning in their life as well too.
I've heard of Second Life.
Yes.
I just started that because I looked at it as a pedagogical tool. We're starting to move to online classes more at UCF. And they seem so anonymous, just these bulletin board postings. So I'd read somewhere in an education magazine that some professors were actually meeting in Second Life, with their virtual
persona. They're doing
persona.
that at DM. In fact, 2C I think has a class.
Really?
Because I peek in from time to time, and they are really into the Second Life, very much into it. And so it's and I think what they're trying to do is figure out how they might use a situation like that in the education.